Good evening and welcome to the Township of Woolwich Committee of the Whole meeting on February 6th, 2024. We welcome everyone here today and all those watching on YouTube. I will now do a roll call of council. I, Councillor Cadeau, present and chairing this meeting. Mayor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor Bryant.
Present.
Councillor Burgess.
Present.
Councillor Grant.
Present.
Councillor Schwinn.
Good evening.
Good evening to you and thank you. So we do need a public resolution to reconvene an open session. Moved by Councillor Bryant, seconded by Councillor Grant. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. I want to acknowledge the land on which we live has been here from time immemorial and that Indigenous people have lived here from time immemorial. I thank the Chinootan, also called the Anawanarun, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people who have lived here and cared for this land and continue to share and steward this land with us. May we together learn to care for each other, our flora and fauna, and the land that sustains us. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, there are no items to come forward from closed session. There are no public meetings. But this evening, we do have a presentation by Heather Sewell and Rob Fielder of NPG Planning Solutions regarding the official plan review. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Mayor, members of council, and those in attendance. My name is Heather Sewell, a principal planner at NPG Planning Solutions, and the project lead on the new Woolwich OP project. We are really excited to be here today and have enjoyed being a part of this process. Township staff have been a pleasure to work with, and learning about your community has been very, very important. I am joined here today by my planning colleagues, Lee Chang Lim and Rob Fiedler, who have been integral to the work completed to date. I apologize. Am I sharing the screen? Okay, I will begin. This? Okay, wonderful. Is that? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Is it space bar? Arrows? Oh, how did you do that? Okay. Okay. And can people see the screens on the side here? No? Okay, great. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So we are here today to give you a project update on your Woolwich work plan. I will begin the presentation by giving a quick summary of the work completed to date as a refresher. And then Lee Chang and Rob will give you an update on phase 4 work that has been completed, namely the 3 background reports that were included in your package. Following this, I will guide you through the policy directions report that was completed in phase 5 of the work plan, and we will wrap up the presentation with a few key points on next steps and where we're heading next with the draft of the official plan. The Woolwich OP work plan consists of 6 phases, so we are nearing the end. We began this process this time last year in Q1 of 2023 with a project kickoff meeting, and we are hoping to have it wrapped up in the spring this year as Q1, Q2 of 2024 with the adoption of the new official plan. To date, there have been 2 milestone deliverables completed, which we walked you through last summer. The first deliverable was the environmental scan, which was completed in our phase 2 work, which was a comprehensive review of legislation, provincial policy, regional policy, and the township's pertinent documents and studies, such as your asset management plan and core study, to name a few. The second deliverable was our vision, a report where we had an opportunity to meet with people in the community through focus group sessions and stakeholder meetings, and a community survey to hear what they were saying and what they envisioned their community to be. The combined findings produced the new vision for the township, along with the values, guiding principles, and goals. Both these documents were foundational for the remaining work we did in phase 4 and 5 because they allowed us to really get to know the township. During the fall of last year, we began working on phase 4 of the work plan, which was essentially an investigation of very specific topics that the township wanted to review, which resulted in 3 background reports. A 15-minute community strategy focused on commercial uses in Elmira, St. Jacobs, the Stockyards, and Breslau, which is shown in pink on the left. An institutional strategy which focused on a review of institutional uses in the township, where they were located and how they could be defined, which is shown in the center. And an intensification study which looks at, again, Elmira, Breslau, and St. Jacobs, and the Stockyards, and how on a very high level growth can be accommodated in these areas, shown on the right. Now I will turn it over to Lee Chang and Rob, who will talk you through these background reports in more detail and explain a little bit about the methodology, the findings, and how this all ties into your final draft new official plan.
As Heather mentioned, I led the 15-minute community commercial strategy, which is a study to review whether residential neighborhoods are within a 15-minute walk of a commercial area, with a particular focus on the urban design, pedestrian experience, and walkability. Next slide, please. The direction to implement a 15-minute community comes from the Region of Waterloo's official plan. The Region of Waterloo defines a 15-minute community as compact, well-connected neighborhoods where people of all ages and abilities can access daily necessities within a 15-minute trip. And this includes a mix of jobs and local stores and a full range of housing and transportation options. So this definition is foundational to our study. We conducted the analysis for Elmira, St. Jacobs, and Breslau through site visits in order to understand the community context and to catalog the existing uses. And we computed 5-minute and 15-minute walks in GIS, and we used walking as the primary mode of transport in our analysis, as it assumes basic active transportation facilities such as sidewalks. Next slide, please. So these are our findings that we discovered through our analysis, and overall, they reinforce the importance of various components in the region's definition of a 15-minute community, namely the range of housing and transportation options, the mix of jobs and stores, and urban design. We found that there are quite a few variety of commercial uses in all 3 communities, but the type of commercial use that's not there is a barrier to being a full 15-minute community. For example, grocery stores. We found through our analysis and through our engagement that there isn't a walkable grocery store in Elmira's core area, and there's no grocery store in St. Jacobs and Breslau. So that's a key factor in fully implementing the 15-minute community. We also found that in planning for new neighborhoods, such as the lands that have been added to Breslau through OPA 6, the importance of ensuring the appropriate density and a range of housing options in order to support those future commercial uses, as commercial uses need an appropriate level of population density in order to thrive. We also heard a lot about the noise and truck traffic on Arthur Street through our engagement and through our site visits. And it serves to highlight the importance of urban design, streetscape, and roadway design in order to provide an environment that is safe, pleasant, and convenient for people to walk to local stores and support local businesses, and essentially attract essential commercial uses. Next slide, please. Based on our findings, we identified the need to better understand commercial gaps in the 3 communities in order to plan for future commercial uses. We also identified the need in the new official plan to support density targets and a range of housing types, urban design excellence in order to facilitate an environment that supports safe and connected pedestrian experiences, to support traffic calming measures, and generally to support initiatives to redirect truck traffic. With that, I'll turn it over to Rob to lead you through the institutional study.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the institutional strategy and then after that, the intensification strategy, which are the two other background reports that inform the policy directions report. The institutional strategy examined the location of existing institutional uses in the township and considered how the current official plan through land use designations and policies provides space for institutional uses to locate within Woolwich. High level, the purpose of the institutional strategy was to explore how institutional uses might be best addressed in your new official plan. Next slide. Given the purpose of the study, we considered best practices and trends, the institutional landscape in Woolwich, sites and preferred locations for institutional uses, considerations unique to Woolwich, so small-scale churches and schools in the agricultural countryside, definitions, uses versus land use designations. Regarding these, we looked into how other municipalities deal with institutional uses in their official plans and zoning bylaws. So that was to identify best practices and trends. Specifically, we focused on definitions, policies or approaches that seem particularly salient to Woolwich, those that highlighted opportunities to refine or adjust your existing policy framework, identify possible policy gaps, and confirm where your existing policies are already strong. The institutional landscape is a way of recognizing the continuum that exists, that in addition to publicly funded and provided services that are within public facilities, there are other providers of educational, social, and medical services, and they may not be located within public facilities. So your framework also has to address, for example, the difference between a home daycare business and a childcare center that's located within a public school or community center. Another would be medical services that are provided in hospitals versus doctor's offices and private offices. So the institutional strategy has to think about the institutional landscape as it exists and may evolve when it's developing recommendations for your new official plan. A major consideration is how policies, land use designations, and definitions pertaining to institutional uses will interact. An institutional designation, for example, is typically only used to reserve land for major institutional uses in areas that are new or being newly developed. So the recommendations which are discussed on the next slide speak to how a range of needs that fall broadly under the umbrella of institutional uses can be accommodated while ensuring that there's land use compatibility and that the township's plan structure is achieved. Next slide, please. So just going through the recommendations, you'll find them in the executive summary in the final section of the report. A major recommendation is to define institutional uses to encapsulate the policy-defined terms that relate to institutional uses. So that would be in the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the region's plan. But also to cover general characteristics and typical uses that would qualify other building structures or uses as institutional when you're interpreting your policies. And to define major institutional uses and quasi-institutional uses. We may not actually use the term quasi in the final plan. Allow most institutional uses in any land use designation subject to evaluation criteria, but designate the major institutional uses when you're comprehensively planning or when you have a change in use to a major institutional use. Encourage institutional uses to locate in commercial or commercial mixed use areas, particularly key nodes, such as the Elmira core area. Maintain the existing planning framework for your rural institutional uses, and for the small-scale schools and places of worship in the agricultural countryside, and limit institutional uses in employment areas. So there are some institutional uses you may want to allow. You generally don't want a lot of them to go there, particularly large places of worship, for instance. Next slide. So moving on to the intensification strategy. This report provides an intensification strategy to ensure the township's planning framework can meet or exceed the minimum intensification targets stipulated by the region of Waterloo in their official plan as amended by ROPA 6, which came into effect last year. So addressing the growth management component of ROPA 6 is a major piece of your new official plan. Next slide. So moving through the key issues and challenges. So Woolwich is required to plan for forecasted growth and to ensure that the minimum intensification target can be achieved. So you have to plan for it, right? You can't force people to build necessarily, but you need to ensure you're accommodating. And specifically in that regard, you need to ensure that you plan to allow about 1,620 intensification units to 2051 in the existing built-up areas of Breslau, Elmira, and St. Jacobs. So existing built-up areas is something the province defines as the delineated built-up boundary as of 2006. So it doesn't change a lot. So you have to ensure that you're going to get about 1,600 units in that area. As I noted, the number is provided in the region's official plan, and it's based on the minimum intensification target of 20%, which works out to about 1 intensification unit for every 5 units that get built in the designated greenfield areas. So your newly developed areas, like the areas sort of on the flanks of Elmira and Breslau. So a key component of the strategy was thinking about how you direct and shape the intensification that's required. So where should it occur and what form should it take? And when we say form, we're thinking in terms of the housing form mainly, whether you're talking about low rise or mid rise, medium density, but density is higher than the existing in most cases. For the new official plan, this means identifying sufficient lands as strategic growth areas. So these are the areas where intensification is primarily directed, particularly in forms that are going to be denser and somewhat larger than exists. In doing that, a key consideration for us and for you is to ensure that we're creating a sense of place, that we're enhancing the existing character, that we're increasing housing choice as part of the exercise, and that we're aligning with other township planning initiatives that are underway, such as the update to your comprehensive zoning bylaw. The intensification strategy is intended to build on your existing community structure. So it was informed by what you already have, walking around and looking at what exists and trying to understand what would enhance this, what would fit with it, but what would achieve those other objectives, including increasing housing choice. And so in that regard, for instance, for downtown Elmira, we considered your Elmira core area urban design guidelines. Next slide. So moving on to the key recommendations. So identifying the following as strategic growth areas, the core area in Elmira. So this isn't really new. It already is the Township Urban Growth Center in your current plan. What is new is when we talk about corridors. So Arthur Street in Elmira, from First Street south to Listell Road, so the bottom of Elmira's urban area. The core area of St. Jacobs, as well as a cluster of properties that are north of the Conestoga River, generally around Northside Drive and Parkside Drive. and then a cluster of lands that are near the rail line designated Village, Main Street, and commercial mixed use in the current Breslau settlement plan. In terms of scale, redevelopment up to mid-rise, so 4 to 8 stories in the strategic growth areas. So the high end of that being some of the growth areas, not all of them. And this is largely to align with work that's being carried out by the township in their zoning bylaw update. And to consider other work you've done, like the core area urban design guidelines for downtown Elmira. In addition to this, the intensification strategy also recommends that you support gentle intensification. So some of that is required based on Planning Act changes and particularly those that relate to allowing additional dwelling units. And that in doing that, you also provide some supplementary direction to ensure compatibility and any other considerations that should be considered. Another part of it is a policy framework to address development applications that are in isolated sites with intensification potential that aren't located in the identified strategic growth areas. So in these cases, you would want to have the applications proceed by official plan amendment and or zoning bylaw amendment, depending on their scale. But the issue here is ensuring you have adequate evaluation criteria for those applications that appear for places that aren't contemplated explicitly in the strategy, but might be amenable to it upon review. And with that, I'll pass things back to Heather.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob. So we're going to switch gears now, and I'm going to walk you through phase 5, which is the policy directions report work that was completed at the beginning of this year in 2024. I just wanted to start out by saying a little bit about what a policy directions report is. A policy directions report is essentially an instructional manual for your new official plan. It's how an easy way of viewing it. And essentially all the information that we've gathered to date, such as the environmental scan, the vision report, and all the background reports that we went through, serve as a foundation for it. So on a very high level, the instructions outlined in each of the chapters of the policy directions report tell us how the new official plan will change or remain the same from your current official plan. It's just a high level way of thinking about it. So the policy directions report has been laid out in the following framework, which will ultimately be translated into the table of contents of the proposed new official plan. I would like to point out a few chapters in particular. Chapter 2 is based on the work which I mentioned quite a bit this evening in my presentation on the Our Vision report, which is essentially the guiding principles, goals, and vision that were created with consultation through the community. Chapters 4, 8, and 9. So the environment, the rural settlements, and the countryside chapters will remain relatively similar to what you have now in your current official plan. So there are not many changes proposed in the policy directions report, in other words, for these chapters. So I'd like to direct your attention to the chapters where there will be changes, which I'll get into in the next slide. But those will essentially be in chapters 5, township-wide policies, 6, the urban areas, 7, the township urban areas, and 10, implementation tools. And this is where the bulk of the changes that are being proposed for your new official plan will occur or can be found. So for example, in the top left, I'll start with structure. So essentially, structure of the plan is how the plan will be laid out. What will the different chapters be? What will be included in each of the chapters? The structure in terms of the Breslau secondary plan, which is now being updated, as you know, and the stockyards secondary plan, which are no longer under appeal. Right now, you have those chapters, for example, in Chapter 7 of your current official plan. So it's embedded in a very large chapter that deals with all settlement areas. So what we're proposing from a structure perspective is taking it out of there and putting it essentially into its own chapter. So the actual content from the secondary plans will not change much, except for what you're going through with Jeremy and the Breslau secondary plan. But otherwise will, remain relatively the same. It's the structure that will change. So there's some similar changes in terms of structure also for the rural settlement areas, which we've put into their own chapter, as well as the township urban areas. So in terms of on the board there, you see urban design, mobility network, open space, community spaces. These are policies that we've reviewed on a best practices basis. And they are proposed suggestions for adding to your new official plan. So I would draw your attention to those in the policy directions report. Some of these policies include policies related to design objectives for the public realm, for example, or climate change policies which have been added, as well as integration of transportation planning and infrastructure planning. I'd also like to mention that some of these changes in Chapter 5 township-wide policies such as cultural heritage, which is up there on the top right. Those changes were made as a result of legislative changes, which is also part of our review and analysis for bringing the new official plan into conformity with the new, as you know, there's been a lot of legislative changes. So the cultural heritage policies that we've proposed in your new official plan relate to those changes in Bill 23. And then there's also conformity such as 15-minute communities, which is a result of ROPA 6, which Lee Chang also touched on this evening. And those are proposed changes as a result of that and that conformity exercise with the ROPA 6. So last but not least, there's some direction, bless you, given in the policy directions report through Chapter 10, which is where the implementation tools for the official plan can be found. And some of these changes that we're proposing are in relation to monitoring of the official plan and some of the targets that will be found in there and just monitoring of them, which would be useful for council in the future and planning staff, as well as some policies related to delegation of approval. So those have been updated as well. Okay, so where do we go from here? We are nearing the end of the process, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and the final phase of the work plan is phase 6, which is the actual drafting of the official plan and the related schedules and mapping. So we'll continue to work with township staff as we've done with council and the community to obtain feedback. Along the way, there will be 2 additional opportunities that will be coming up through a focus group session, which is part of the work plan. So we'll have an opportunity to hear from you again at that point. And then following that will be the statutory open house and public meeting. And we're hoping to have this wrapped up by Q1, Q2 2024 with the adoption of the official plan. So when all is said and done, all of the deliverables, which was noted on the left-hand side of the screen, such as the environmental scan, the vision report, all of the background reports, the policy directions report, as well as the Breslau secondary plan update, which township staff Jeremy and John have been working on, and as well as a Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which NPG is also working on with township staff, that will be brought to council for your review in the springtime as well. And all of these background reports and documents ultimately will feed into your new official plan. And it will be released, as I mentioned, in Q1, Q2 2024. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. I know it's a lot of information that we've put before you in your packages the last few weeks. It was a lot of reading. So I hope we've been able to break it up, break it down. We are certainly available for questions, and we are really looking forward to continue and wrap up this project in the springtime. And then also just hear what you have to say, and how we can work that into future work we're doing. And then I also want to mention that we've been doing regular updates on the Engage WR website. So please watch out for those. We typically update every 2 weeks, or try to, for both the Parks and Recreation and the Woolwich OP. So if people are online, then please head over to the Engage WR. We're available for questions. Thank you, and feedback.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather, Rob, and Lee, for that presentation. Does council have any questions for the presenter? I see that Deanne and Jeremy are also here. No? There wasn't any motions or anything coming out of this. I don't know if it was a receipt for information purposes or not, if you needed a motion. No?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, there is a recommendation on the floor that council, that reflecting the report, council receives report and comments for incorporation into the new official plan.
Mover on. Councilor Grant. Second, Councilor Bryant. I can't see Councilor Schwint, so sorry if you're vigorously waving your hand there, Councilor Schwint. Any further discussion? No? All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Thanks again for coming. We have no delegations. We have no unfinished business. We do have 2 items for information under consent items, though. Does anyone on council wish to discuss these items, or would someone move a motion to receive it? Mayor Shantz?
Not here. Sorry.
Councilor Grant motion. Second by Councilor Mayor Shantz. It has been. All those in favor, or any further discussion? All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you. All right, we do have 2 items as well that have been pulled from the information package. First one is 11.1. Mayor Shantz, I know that you had made the request for this item on the AMO policy update, social and economic prosperity review. Would you care to speak to this?
Thank you. So this is just a draft resolution asking that to support the province commit to working with AMO on a comprehensive social and economic prosperity review to look at the sustainability of municipal finances across Ontario. We've been asking for years for sustainable funding for to help us to get through. We were just finishing through budget, and it's really difficult to do the projects that we need to do and maintain the services that we need to maintain on property taxes alone. So I would move that we support this draft resolution. I don't know if David wanted to add to that at all. No.
Moved by Mayor Shantz, seconded by Councilor Bryant. Any further discussion on this? Councilor Bryant?
I agree with what the mayor has said. This is something that we need to get funding from the province for, particularly when we have a huge growing population of seniors that will be on fixed incomes. And just in general, the cost of living for everyone. I think this is something the province needs to support going forward. So I fully support this.
Seeing no further hands, do I vote on this one? Motion? Yeah. All right, all those in favor? And that's carried.
Did you want to vote? We could have made it a recorded vote.
I will.
Okay.
I don't think it's official. Sorry, Clerk Smith. Strike that from the record. Speaking about the budget discussions that we've been having, there's another item that was pulled from the package. I had requested that it be pulled from the package, but in conversations with Councillor Grant, you're comfortable. I don't want to put words in your mouth here. So this is an item that I'm not going to speak to, so Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Councillor Trudeau. Yeah, so this is a letter from the County of Prince Edward. And this is in regards to fire apparatus and extending that life period that we've kind of been having several conversations about the past couple weeks with our budget deliberation. As we've seen, the 20-year life cycle is not necessarily a legislated item, but it is something that affects our home insurance and directly impacts our residents. So I would ideally like to see a support for this motion, whether that is us acknowledging receipt of this and supporting the County of Prince Edward in this, or to the extent of us even writing our motion of ourselves and following the same footsteps of asking for the province to provide some assistance when it comes to fire apparatus, especially as we've seen a remarked increase in how much they cost.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. So just for clarification, do we want to put this one back to staff for recommendation? Do we want to just motion support? Is there any further discussion from council? Because we do have the motion. We don't have a second at this point yet. Mayor Shantz?
I wonder if it would be good for staff to have a chance to just take a look at it, and some of the things in here seem like they may be fairly specific to a municipality. So just to ensure that it actually fits our municipality.
Is that something that Clerk Smith is capable of handling then?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, if you want, if council wants, I can work with the fire chief and come up with a resolution that would work for this council.
Councillor Schwinn?
Reading the motion, one thing that comes to my mind is the need to move away from absolute 20 years, but take into account the condition of the equipment. I don't think we want to blanket keep fire trucks around until they're antiques, but there should be some sort of safety process to evaluate the equipment on annual or biannual basis. Looking for consideration.
Yeah, thanks for that. I agree that just having that blanket 20-year window and then insurance rates being impacted to whatever degree it is seems somewhat unfair. So having a bit more clarity around that could be helpful as well. All right, so that's good. You have all you need then, Clerk Smith. Brings us to staff reports and memos. So we do have one staff report. Clerk Smith, you're here to present on this one, so back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the township licenses all vendors is sort of sorry, I guess I should say around the Maple Syrup Festival. We offer a blanket license to the festival to sell, any goods or food, and then they take care of sort of sub-licensing all the vendors that are in the mall or at the WMC. What this proposal is just for the vendors that are outside of the festival, but still selling around the festival day. And it's actually a request from the Maple Syrup Festival. Our fee is typically $60, but they are asking that we take payment essentially in the form of maple syrup, give that to the festival so that they can provide the school lunch, pancake breakfast that they do. So unless there's any questions, or sorry, I'd be happy to take any questions that council may have.
Councillor Bryan?
Thank you. Through you to Clerk Smith. When you mention outside the festival selling area, are you referring to the side roads and every place where they set up little stands?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So that is something that, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. We've seen often vendors selling maple syrup, pastries, basically small food items on sort of our side roads. The festivals approach us because we think often they make their own maple syrup. So instead of requiring the financial licensing fee, that they could pay that in a syrup fee.
I just can't help myself from smiling. This has to be the most Elmira thing I've ever heard, and I absolutely love it. So sorry for just letting that slip out. Further questions or comment? So there is a recommendation in the report, if anybody's willing to move it. Councillor Grant, Councillor Burgess. I'll call a question then. All those in favor? And that's carried. Next, we have Interim Director of Finance, Stephen Fairweather, to present the draft 2024 water and wastewater budget. Mr. Fairweather.
Through the chair, before you tonight is the water and wastewater operating budgets. I'll deal with the water budget first. The water budget's going up by about 4.08%, or 7 cents per cubic meter to $1.96. The major changes contained within the water budget are basically the regional increase in the wholesale rate is going up by 3.9%. And there's a third funding in there for a revenue clerk. The impacts of this to the average customer using 204 cubic meters annually is about $14.28 per year, or $2.38 per bill. For the wastewater operations, we're looking at a 5% overall increase there, which works out to be about a 16 cents cubic meter increase over 2023, bringing it to $3.34 per cubic meter. The major changes within the wastewater operations are the regional rate for treatment costs is going up 4.9%. There's the other half of the debt payment incorporated this year for Industrial Drive. There's a third funding for the revenue clerk and some I&I investigations in Elmira. So for an average customer using 204 cubic meters of treatment, it's going up about $32.64 annually, or $5.44 per bill. And I'd take any questions.
Thank you, Interim Director Fairweather. Council, any questions? Mayor Shantz?
I don't have a question, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the revenue clerk position, because they still are included in here. And we had some discussion last week. I was in the chair, so it was a little hard to discuss. But one thing I'd like to talk about with that position is, you know, there have been times where there have been overruns on water, including our own water from has happened. I know that over the last couple of terms, we've had a number of people who have had complaints about extremely large bills because they had a leak or something was wrong and it wasn't caught in time. And I remember one in particular. I spent an awful lot of time with the manager and with the director trying to resolve what it was, how to make it fair and right to everyone. And so I think it's really important that we can use the new system that we're implementing as well to its best advantage to monitor some of that. And I know we're going to have a strategic plan, and at that, I'm sure we'll discuss where we sit as a group on customer service. Previous council, that was a really important piece. And so, yeah, but that'll be Thursday. I realize that, but I just wanted to bring that up and make those points, because I do see the need to pay attention to our revenue and our billing streams.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll go Councillor Bryant and then Councillor Burgess.
Just for clarity, did we approve that position or did we not approve that position? I'm getting a little confused here on this one.
My understanding is the finance clerk, the new position, was not approved in the other budget,
Okay.
but my understanding is what Mayor Shantz is saying is that a portion of that still remains in the water and wastewater budget, if it's correct, yeah.
Okay, just,
Because the way that that was funded, and throw to Director Fairweather here, but only 1/3 was coming from finance and the 2/3 were coming from different areas, if I'm not mistaken.
that is correct, but I was just confused because I thought we had pulled it from the whole thing, I thought. That's where I'm getting confused.
Can you offer a little bit of clarity? Because I agree that, you know, seeing this in front of us again and wanting to improve it does kind of pose questions. I imagine, I'm not going to imagine, I'm not going to speculate, Mr. Fairweather.
Through the chair, the position was requested as correct in the operating budget as a third funding. That third funding was denied. So the position's back before council in the water and wastewater budget still for a decision of whether it's to be totally eliminated or not.
Thank you for that clarification. So would we be moving forward with 2/3 of the position then?
Through the chair, the way it's tabled in the budget is for a full-time FTE. Should council proceed with this, we wouldn't have sufficient funding to hire a full-time position. So we'd have to see what we do on that. And we'd have to work it out, but the ask is still there for a full-time FTE for water and wastewater.
Councillor Burgess, I know that you had a comment. Does that change things now that you have that bit of information?
Through you, Chair. I just have more general comments at the moment based on your presentation there, Director Fairweather. Looking at our reserve funds for water and wastewater currently, we're looking at over 2 million in the deficit. And I think over 2.5 actually, plus more being taken out this year, even with the increase in rates that we're suggesting, which increases are never great. But I was just wondering if you could comment on our long-term vision or how we expect to get this under control.
Through the chair, you're absolutely right. The water fund is anticipated to have about a $1.8 million deficit in the reserve fund, and the wastewater about a little over 400,000. Contained within the budget ask was the funding to carry out a rate study and update the rates. So as part of that study, we'd be reviewing the fixed costs and the variable costs and looking at resetting the rates in order to move it more to sustainability again. The rate studies are normally updated about every 5 years. And they sort of are done that way to reset the situation that's here on the reserve funds to ensure that you're getting adequate funding. Some of the issues on the draws in and out of the reserve funds is you budget for an average. So some periods you'll have a deficit, some periods you'll have a excess cash sitting within the reserve funds, but overall you try to budget to have sufficient funding for sustainability. And so the rate study will allow us to revisit that and reset that and bring that before council. We're hoping to get that done before the end of Q3 of 2024.
Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. The situation where we had a particular overrun, was that covered by the reserve?
The overrun, if you're referring to the water loss through the airport area, that would have been factored in within the operating budget and would have probably come out of the reserve funds for water also.
Councillor Schwinn?
Yeah, the reserve fund balance caught my attention, and I was originally going to propose using the money that was allocated to the additional hire to help out the reserves to a modest, very modest degree. But also wondering how much would the rates have to go up if we wanted to cover, say, 20% of the current deficit in the reserve funds? Because I'm concerned waiting till Q3 and then another year of not addressing problem. We should be trying to at least stop taking on water, so to speak, on this fund and change course. So don't know, Director Fairweather, to give 20% reduction, what would that cost?
Just 1 second, I'll put that in.
Sure. Well, there's a bit of a lull here. I will say that over the last week, having gone through budget deliberations, I was approached by one member of the public who pointed out that getting their water bill 2 days before it's due, with a potential penalty charge applied if they don't meet that deadline, could be seen as somewhat unjust. So I just wanted to communicate that with the rest of council.
Through the chair, if I understand the question, you're saying add an additional $800,000 or $900,000 to the wastewater budget as a contribution to the reserve funds for that. That would take your rate up to about $2.28 per cubic meter, or a 20.85% increase in the water rates. For wastewater, if I understood it correctly, you want to fund half of the deficit in wastewater, so that's about $200,000. That would take your rates up to $3.47 per cubic meter, or a 9.2% increase in the wastewater rates.
Councillor Burgess?
For you, Chair, just clarity, I think that was 50% and Councillor Schwinn asked for 20, or am I mistaken there? Just for clarity.
20% was my original number, yes. Thinking a 5-year catch up.
You do a 20% increase, you're adding about $80,000 to the wastewater. It would take you up to 339, or just a little over 6% increase.
I guess my position is I don't think we can totally ignore it. This time around, we need to start making steps towards fixing those deficits. So I'd be suggesting we should be budgeting a little higher increase. And Chair Cadeau's comments about the 2-day window to pay, you're completely correct in that. And we should be changing dates. If we're delayed on invoicing, change the due dates. That's a administrative change, I would think.
Through the chair, if you would do that to water, we're increasing about $360,000. And it would take the rate to $2.11 per cubic meter, or 11.63% increase.
Councillor Bryant?
Just a comment on the late billing periods. I don't find my bills are late. I'm wondering if it's maybe a Canada Post issue potentially, that they're just being, I don't know, not delivered promptly, because mine, I have lots of time on it when I do get it, just to comment.
I wouldn't be able to tell you the specifics. I'm just relaying a message that was provided to me. Yeah. David?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Fairweather. Mr. Fairweather, what's been your experience over your career in terms of have municipalities found themselves in these situations of taking an interim step in advance of a wastewater type of study review? Is it something, again, that just allows us to take that interim step, as Councillor Schwint is requesting the rest of council support? And then once we get the full review, we will know what the rates would need to increase by on a multi-year phase-in type basis?
Through the chair in response to the question, normally the financial plan ties to the rate study. Council can, if they wish, ahead of the rate study, increase the contributions. They may be sufficient, they may not. The rate study is the basis of determining that. Usually within a rate study, the normal ones that are out today try to look at recovering somewhere between 40 to 50% of the operating costs for the water network out of fixed fees. And the remaining comes out of the variable rate to try and tie to the consumption. So you try to recover your major capital infrastructure costing through your fixed rate. So the rate study will develop that. In addition, the rate study will develop a plan of how to move from where you're at to get to sustainability with a plan of increases annually to be brought before council. So the rate study ties to that type of analysis.
Mayor Shantz?
So I think where Councillor Schwint may have been going, if I can make a presumption there, if we did the increase to cover 20% of the deficit now, once the rate study's done, that would actually end up potentially being a bigger increase. So I guess what I'm saying is if we make that increase now and make that choice now, it's not going to overshoot the rate study. Is that fair?
Through the chair, it probably won't on it, but I don't have the complete analysis to say yes or no to that question. It appears based on where the reserve fund is that you're drawing a significant chunk out at this present time in time. However, the reserves and reserve funds are tried to be funded based on an average level of sustainability, because you'll have periods where you draw more and periods where you draw less. So they try to fund it sort of, it's a flat line going across on the funding. So it's not unusual to see a deficit in a reserve fund on years where you're having heavy draws and where your draws are lighter because you don't need as much infrastructure rehabilitation. Then the funding replenishes the reserve fund back to an adequate level.
David?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to council. The only other thing I would add is that, I think Councillor Schwint, not to put words in his mouth, but probably realizing, like the rest of council, that Mr. Fairweather has previously reported our current study is 2005. So there hasn't been updates every 5 years. So I think with the idea of a 20%, it's hopefully a conservative way of saying, let's get a jump start on things, recognizing that our study is almost 20 years old.
So you want to answer that one, Councillor Schwint?
In a perfect world, that 20% is a way too high of an increase, but I'm very confident it's not.
So where do you stand with things then, Councillor Schwint? I don't want to put words in your mouth either. Are you moving that we increase it by 20%?
20% overall increase levied? No, I thought I heard Director Fairweather say about a 9% increase on the wastewater would do that. I'm sorry, I forget what the water compar would be.
Through the chair, to do the 20% funding in the wastewater, it's about $360,000. Additional, it would move the rate increase to 11.63 or $2.11 a cubic meter.
Seems like a lot, but almost seems necessary.
In response to the question, the wastewater we'd be adding about $80,000 because you're about $400,000 in deficit. And that would bring your wastewater up to a 6.68% increase or $3.39 per cubic meter.
So blended, it's almost a pill I can swallow.
Any further discussion on this? Well, there are 3 recommendations then. Mover. Further discussion? Advice to staff? Go ahead, Councillor Schwint.
As I unmute myself, I'll make the recommendation to go with the revised rates as given to us by Director Fairweather, combined with the elimination of the additional staff person. And that money would also go to reserves.
Mayor Shantz?
I'm still struggling with the elimination of the position. Had we had the position, we wouldn't have the deficit, or at least not nearly as bad a deficit potentially. And so, so I'm still struggling with that.
Councillor Bridges?
Can we just move forward with the original part of that motion? If you want to amend that, Councillor Schwint, and we can talk about the position after the fact.
You're muted. I don't know if that was a
Right.
question for me or you.
I guess we should have the combined conversation would be my thoughts. I think it's a worthy conversation, but it goes together.
Councillor Grant?
Thank you. Through you to the rest of council. I also similarly struggle with the elimination of this position with the motion. I voted for the position to remain, so I would agree with Mayor Shantz that I feel that with this position, we probably wouldn't have been in the situation we're in, and I think it's just kind of passing the buck, so to speak, to the taxpayer as opposed to maybe funding a position that could have prevented this from happening in the first place.
Councillor Schwint?
My last comment on this will be, I believe that if we have a full complement of the finance department in place, that I'm hoping there will be efficiencies found and more work can be done than we think currently. That's why I'm reluctant to increase staff complement until we have a full team in place, so to speak. And we're going to have to find ways to be more efficient in our departments. And I'm hoping that we'll come back and hear some efficiency ideas from staff.
Barring any further discussion, we do have one motion on the table. We do need a seconder before move any further with that. To square one, are we? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Through you, Chair. If nobody's seconding that, do we just make another motion? So I'll just separate those two, see if I can get a second on mine. I guess I'll say that council directs staff to include the revenue clerk in the final budget for council's consideration. That makes sense.
Can you clarify that? So are you taking all 3 recommendations as written or just that single recommendation?
So just that we're gonna include the revenue clerk in the final budget, the position. So we're not gonna touch on this motion, the wastewater and water increases.
So we have a motion then that the water wastewater budget will include the position. Is that correct?
I think it's separate from what's here.
Yeah, I think I'm just making my own motion kind of separate from that, that as opposed to what we decided last week, we're just making a motion strictly now to approve the revenue clerk as a whole from both the operating levy and the water and wastewater budget.
We have a motion on the floor. I see Eric, you want to comment?
Just wondering if Clerk Smith could comment on that. Unacceptable motion.
Through the chair, I believe it is, but if you're looking for my advice for you, I might suggest you direct staff to include it in the final budget, so you are not binding yourself next week. But it's up to the mover.
I was just wondering, did we vote the other way last week?
Yeah, sorry, through the chair. The way you voted last week was to remove it from the draft budget. So your final decisions on the budget next Monday are sort of what's final and binding, unless you pass something else tonight.
Councillor Burgess.
So the wording I used, if it's correct, is that council directs staff to include the revenue clerk in the final budget for council's consideration. Does that work for you, Clerk Smith?
Seconded by Mayor Shantz. Further discussion? I don't know if that was a half hand, Councillor Schwent, but if not, okay, I'll call a vote then. All those in
Can we do a
favor?
recorded vote?
Sure. I'll leave it to Clerk Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As requested, I'll do a recorded vote in a random order. Councillor Burgess. Councillor Grant.
In favor.
Mayor Shantz. Councillor Bryant.
Opposed?
Councillor Schwint.
Opposed.
And Councillor Cadeau.
In favor.
That motion is carried with 4 votes in favor and 2 votes opposed.
All right, so now can we attack the other 2 recommendations that are in this report? Councillor Bryant.
So we'd have to pull out the section about the revenue clerk out of this like, how does that affect everything?
Clerk Smith, please enlighten us.
So if I can help, and I'll ask Mr. Fairweather to correct me if I'm wrong, but the recommendation in front of council is to approve the draft water and wastewater budgets, adopt the water and wastewater fees and charges bylaw, and direct staff to bring forward the budgets for final approval on February 12th. There has been some council discussion, I believe, about changing that first recommendation as amended for some additional revenue for the reserves. But I think those 3 motions are separate from what you just passed. And Mr. Fairweather, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think you could vote on those things.
Through the chair, the motion that was before you was to adopt the budget as printed in the council package. From what I understand of the motion that just was discussed, it was definitive to include the revenue clerk with funding in the operating water and wastewater. Funding for the revenue clerk is contained within the draft budget before committee tonight. So the recommendation would be to approve the remainder of the budget. And then if council wishes to put a motion on the floor to increase the contributions to the reserve funds, as was discussed, that would be an amendment to the motion. So there'd be an amendment for that.
Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, just maybe a process question. I think that discussion on the water and wastewater is item 2 in the recommendation. And I'm my screen's pretty little here when I don't have 2 screens. So I can't see what the fees and charges are. But if we just put that increase in the fees and charges, if Councillor Schwint and council is leaning in that direction, would we not just include that in item 2? Or is that too confusing, Clerk Smith? Is it easier, cleaner the other way?
Sorry, through the chair. I'd suggest if you want to approve these, the draft wastewater and water budgets and the draft water and wastewater fees and charges bylaw as amended to include additional contributions to reserves, that was probably the easiest way.
So do we still have a motion from Councillor Schwint? We do not. I'll ask it again there. Do we, okay, I'm getting confused now too. So probably that makes most sense. So Councillor Schwinn, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but since you're the one that brought forth the recommendation to potentially switch the allocation of funding, would you be comfortable motioning in that direction?
So I make a motion to adopt the fees and water and sewer fees and charges as amended to allow for additional funds going to reserves.
Yeah, that is much more clear. Are there any other questions or comments?
Seconder.
All right, we do need a seconder. Sorry, don't talk yet. Any seconders? We have thank you so much, Councillor Grant. We do have a seconder. Now, is there any further questions or comments? Yeah, Mayor Shantz.
Just to be clear, then this will also come back as part of the total budget piece next Monday, correct? In case anyone has sober second thoughts.
All right, I'll call it then. All those in favor? And that is carried. Shut my mic off like we were all done, but we're not. There's other business, council reporter updates. Does any members of council wish to give any reports or updates? Any discussion on the outstanding activities list? Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, can I, and David and I talked about this briefly. The taxation of old order Mennonite churches is something that has been sitting on there since 2017. Actually, a couple of these have been sitting there for a very long time. Could you just explain to Jeremy where that stands, how it works, and why we're stuck?
Through the chair to the mayor. So yes, it's been on there for a while. The issue goes back to when we permit a small church, the churches and schools in the rural area on farms to support the Mennonite community, horse and buggy Mennonite community. They are putting them on the farms right now because they can't create a separate lot for them. So there, you have the farm on there and then a church on part of the property. The problem behind that then is MPAC charges them a commercial rate for the church portion. The only way to get around that is that MPAC says you must sever the property, then the church is the only use and the church doesn't get taxed and the farm gets taxed. So after many years of working between MPAC and the region, we were unable to change MPAC's approach. So we are working on policies and the official plans to allow the severances to take place, because currently, if you were read the letter of the law under the PPS, you can't really sever a new non-farm lot. So we have worked with the region and through the province to recognize this cultural significance in this area. And we implemented policies in our current official plan that were put into place 2021 to allow for that to take place. The region's deferred that policy right now until they update their plan. The challenge is, of course, right now, the region's plan is on hold because of Bill 23 and what the region's future looks like in terms of planning. So we are still waiting for regional the region to amend their plan to allow our plan to allow the severances. So hopefully we will see some resolution in the coming year or so, depending on what happens with the region and their direction, and then hopefully allow it to take place, and these farms can then sever the churches off in the future. So it's still a process in waiting, unfortunately, because of the provincial challenges in front of us about planning. So it's not off the table, obviously, it's still on our list, but we're hoping to get there maybe this year.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Mayor Shantz?
Yeah, thank you. I think some of the holdup was, again, previously was also getting it put into policies as we went forward. And I remember Councillor Bauman was very insistent on this, and it's too bad it's thing. My mic is going off. It should be a simple fix, so hopefully we can get through it.
Any other items from the outstanding activity list? All right, this brings us to the end of our public meeting. However, council needs to return to closed session for one more matter. So I do need a mover and a seconder for the following resolution: that the council of the township of Woolwich convenes in closed session on Tuesday, February 6th, 2024 at 8:30 p.m. in accordance with section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 for the purpose of considering advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose or a legal matter.
I think there was one more personnel item too that we wanted to touch on, or at least some council did.
Sorry, I'll just turn my camera on. If council can add an additional personnel matter, identifiable, thank you, identifiable individuals, personnel matter. If council's okay with that resolution, just need a mover and a seconder.
Moved by Councillor Grant, seconded by Councillor Bryant. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. In closing, council would like to thank those that participated, attended, or tuned into the committee of the whole meeting, and we wish you good night.